Okay, today we are going to start chapter 12, lesson 2 about Rome's decline. So, if you remember, we were talking about the Pax Romana and his time of peace and progress, and the last of those five good emperors was Marcus Aurelius. And after him, unfortunately, there was about a century, 100 years of confusion and violence. So, why was that? Well, first of all, the government grew really weak and confusing because the army became more powerful. To keep in office, an emperor had to keep paying higher and higher wages to keep the soldiers to support him. And if he could not keep up with the payments, the soldiers would just turn against the emperor, and many civil wars broke out with different legions fighting different other legions to try to put their emperor on the throne. And like an example is in about 50 years, ending about 80 to 84, Rome had about 22 different emperors. So it was really a time of upheaval and murder, right? The army or their bodyguards would just kill the emperor to put in their own next person. So it was obviously very disruptive to society. And, society in general went down. People started to change. They stopped honoring duty and courage and honesty. It was more like out for yourself and dishonesty. The government officials would take bribes, and of course then good people didn't want to get involved in the government, and of course it's dangerous. And there's less interest and support for education during this period. And the wealthy just basically stopped paying their taxes. So it's like a mess. So the economy, of course, is also going to suffer during this time with all the different invasions from both within Rome, from the soldiers, and also from foreign invaders, right? Because whenever you're weak, you're open to invasion from the outside. They got a lot of attacks, and the farms were ruined, and they had a lack of supplies and food shortages, and it, of course, disrupted trade. And so the food prices were soaring, and people have less money to spend, so they're not buying goods, and it's like a whole cycle, right? So they can't buy the goods, and so the merchants are seeing their profits go way down, and a lot of them are going out of business, and workers then lose their jobs. So it was just a big cycle. So a big economic decline period. The government tried to produce more coins to deal with it. Unfortunately, that didn't work because they don't have a very good supply of gold and silver. So they made the new coins with less precious metals in it, but then that reduced their value, right? Like at this point in history, that metal is actually the valuable thing. Now our money is like representative, right? The actual paper it's printed on, or linen, is not really worth anything. It's the representative, right? But back then, the value is actually in the real coin, the value of the metal. And so since they put less into it, people started saying, oh, well, if you want to buy that, you have to give me 2 of those coins, right, to make it worth it. And so that means the profits are going to go down, the prices are going up, and causes inflation, right? And basically the money becomes so invaluable that people actually just start bartering and exchanging goods instead of even bothering with the money. Okay, so like I said, when you're struggling and you seem like a mess, other outside places are going to decide that's a great time to take advantage of that and raid you. And so that's what happens in the western part of the empire. The Germanic tribes started invading, and in the eastern part, the Persians started invading. And so individual cities started building protective walls around them. You can still find them in Europe sometimes when you go and you see these huge walls around the city to try to protect themselves. The government did try to hire some Germanic soldiers with the little money they have, but those soldiers are not loyal to them. So it's like a different, feel to your soldiers at that point. So a general, Diocletian, becomes emperor. He takes control, a general, and he tries his best to instill a bunch of reforms, which are like, political changes, right? And so, first of all, he says, all right, we have to defend against all these invasions. So we're going to build forts along the frontiers to try to protect us. And then to try to rule things more efficiently, he divided the 4 parts of the empire, or divided the empire into 4 parts, and then had a ruler for each part. And of course, they would report to him. He still had, the authority over them. He also tried to strengthen the economy by setting maximum prices so that inflation wasn't so out of control, right? So anything like goods or wages or anything could be controlled. He also tried to increase productivity by making workers stay at their same job until they died, right? Because they were having problems getting some of these jobs done. And he also, remember we talked about like people weren't paying their taxes. So he just said, okay, you local officials, you're personally responsible for making sure those taxes get, collected. The only problem is that it didn't really work. And he didn't have the strength to enforce all these rules. And so people just ended up kind of, ignoring it. All right, when he leaves office in 8305, again, a big conflict breaks out and the fighting's continuing for a while until another general, Constantine, becomes emperor in 312. And he, again, tried to do the similar things to Diocletian. He wanted a stable workforce too, and a military that was stable. So he said all the sons have to follow their father. So if your father was a farmer, you have to work your father's land and you're a farmer. And if you were a soldier, if your dad was a soldier, you're a soldier too. Again, it still didn't really work. The empire is in decline. Rome is a mess. So he decides to move the capital to the Greek city of Byzantium, which is in today Turkey. And now it was after that called Constantinople, obviously after him. Okay. And he dies a few years later, and then Theodosius takes over. And he found the empire, again, very large and difficult to govern. So he decided that in order to be able to rule, because there's not only threats and problems inside, there's also all those threats from outside, right? So he decides to make it split into different empires, but not until after he dies, which I thought was funny, right? Like, I want all the power in the huge empire, but after me, really, it shouldn't, it's not sustainable, right? So anyway, the 2 parts are the Western Roman Empire, and the capital will be Rome, and the Eastern Roman Empire with the capital being Constantinople. So this is something that sometimes confuses kids. So make sure you're trying to keep those straight and picture it in your head, and, look at the color coding, and hopefully you can try to keep this a little bit clear in your head. Okay, so now we have a mess again, right? So there's the 300s and 400s, there's all these Germanic tribes who have been migrating in from the north, and they're trying to get some of this territory. They want the territory because they want to raise livestock and farm, and some of them are fleeing from problems in their own lands. The Huns were after them, which is a group from Mongolia. And so there was this one group that was fearing these Hun attacks in Eastern Europe, and they were called the Visigoths. And so what they did is they talked to the Romans and they said, can we be in, your territory and you help protect us from the Huns? And the Romans said, okay, you can, but you have to promise that you're going to be loyal to the empire, right? And promise not to attack us from the inside. Well, unfortunately, the Romans treated the Visigoths really badly. They charged them high prices for food and even enslaved some of their people. And finally, they got tired of the bad treatment and they rebelled in AD 378. And they actually defeated the Romans at Adrianople. And then, of course, that shows how weak the Romans are. And that brings on more attacks. Some other Germanic tribes start invading Gaul, which is France nowadays. And then in AD 410, the Visigoth leader Alaric, his name was, led his people into Italy and actually went and captured Rome, took over Rome itself. They looted the government, all the buildings, and even some private homes. And basically, it's making it pretty clear that, Rome is, over, right? And so another group also attacks Rome later. They first go to Spain and Northern Africa, which are territories, right, in the Roman Empire. And they attack there, and then they go into Italy and enter Rome also in about 455, and they also overcome the Romans. And the Vandals spent about 2 weeks seizing valuables and burning buildings. And so that's where the word vandalism comes from, actually, when you're that willful destruction of property is from these Vandals. Okay, so as you can tell, there have been Germanic people in Rome's organization. And so by about the mid 400s or so, there have been a lot of Germanic soldiers in the Roman government itself. Okay. So what ends up happening is it's actually one of these Germanic leaders that had a high post in Rome's government and the army, and his name was General Odoacer. And Odoacer had enough support that he was able to take control, and he overthrows the Western Roman emperor, who was only 14-year-old, Romulus Augustulus, and he takes control. And that marks the end, basically, of the Western Roman Empire. No one else, no Roman emperor ever again rules Rome from this time on. Okay? So Odoacer rules for about 15 years. And then, again, there's a lot of Germanic groups fighting amongst themselves. Another Visigoth group attacks Rome. They end up killing Odoacer in that attack. And then Theodoric takes over, okay? And so all throughout Europe, you find these other Germanic kingdoms basically developing, okay? And so that's what's going to replace what was in the West. The Western Roman Empire is really now all these Germanic kingdoms. The Roman culture didn't completely go away, though. They adopted a lot of the same things, the Latin language, the laws, the Christianity, right? So a lot of that culture changes, even though it's from this outside, Germanic rule. Okay, and then the eastern part is going to be known as the Byzantine Empire, and we'll talk about that next time. Totally different topic, okay? But it still keeps going. So that half lasts for about another 1,000 years, okay? Now, the last thing we want to talk about is, this is all things we've talked about before. It's kind of a summary. So why do we study Rome, right? There's a lot of legacies that Rome has left us. The legal system, we talked about this, right? Everyone's equal under the law. Everyone's innocent until proven guilty. It's really important for judges to decide the case fairly, right? Based on the evidence, not just, who you are or whatever. So our legal system is definitely influenced by Rome. Our government is also a republican form of government. A republican government means that your citizens elect your leaders. Now, we have a democracy where we think all the citizens should get to vote, right? And remember, Rome, not everyone got an equal vote. It was more, who you were, but still, they were elected, right? The Latin alphabet is very influential. We talked about many languages actually deriving from Latin. We see Latin still in a lot of our English words. There's a lot of phrases still used, all that information that was passed down, like we talked about, scientists, right, use Latin in their a lot of naming conventions, and doctors and lawyers, right? There's still a lot of terms and vocabulary that's from Latin. We still study their literature. I believe you guys, don't you read one of them? I forget if it's this year or next year. We still read and study their literature. We see that evidence of the architecture, right? Washington, D.C., and other capital cities use domes, and a lot of the arches and look of Roman has a lot of influence from Rome. And the construction, of course, that advent of concrete was going to be huge, and is still, concrete's a major building material still today, right? And then we haven't talked too much about Christianity yet, but we're going to. Christianity is a religion that the emperors in about 300s or so adopted. And once an emperor adopts a language, right, then it helps that religion, that helps that religion to spread. Also, the road system, which we talked about, right, which is really great for trade and the economy and soldiers, is also good for spreading ideas. And so Christians could travel safely and quickly and spread their religion that way.